The worst thing that can happen to a man is not to die once, but to keep waking up.
Yeah, that is, it's a staggering thought to open with.
It really is.
But it perfectly captures the atmosphere of, where we're heading today.
Right, absolutely. And, well, if you've ever found yourself wide awake at 3 in the morning, just staring at the ceiling while your mind stubbornly argues with itself, you definitely know that highly specific flavor of exhaustion.
Oh, yeah. Everyone knows that feeling.
The rest of the world is completely silent, but inside your head it feels like this crowded, noisy room where everyone is just yelling at once.
Exactly.
So today, we're exploring an incredibly evocative play we uncovered in our sources by a writer named Farid Novin. It's called The Seventh Game.
And it's just brilliant.
It really is. It takes that universal 3 a.m. anxiety and turns it into this profound exploration of insomnia, the heavy burden of survival, and what it actually means to feel completely divided against yourself. So, okay, let's unpack this.
Well, I gotta say, it is a deeply surreal piece of theater. I mean, the narrative doesn't just treat insomnia as a failure to sleep.
Right.
It treats it as a symptom of a fractured identity. Like, the play asks a very unsettling question. What happens when different parts of your own mind can no longer agree on the basic facts of your reality?
Which is terrifying, honestly. And the story centers around a 15-year-old boy named Armin. The text actually describes him as the wound at the center of the play.
What a description.
I know, right?
Yes.
He's trapped in this perpetual state of wakefulness. But the catch is, he's not alone in his bedroom. He shares the space with 2 constant companions, Ramzi and Navid.
Yeah, and we should probably clarify the reality of these companions, because Ramzi and Navid aren't, roommates.
No.
And they aren't ghosts either. They are the externalized physical embodiments of Armin's own interior life.
Right, which is such a trip.
It really is.
Blech.
The playwright has taken the 2 irreconcilable halves of this teenager's mind and literally given them bodies, voices, and agency right there on the stage.
See, I'm struggling a bit with how this actually plays out, because the whole devil and angel on the shoulder thing is, it's a pretty tired trope at this point.
It definitely can be, yeah.
So why make them physical actors pacing around the room? Why not just let Armin deliver a really raw, agonizing monologue about his anxiety? I mean, we've seen that work in countless psychological dramas.
Well, the thing is, a monologue implies a single, unified self that just happens to be experiencing temporary confusion.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, when a single actor speaks, we, as the audience, just naturally assume they'll eventually work through the problem and come to a conclusion.
Like they'll figure it out by the end of the paragraph.
Exactly. But by physically splitting Armin's mind into 2 distinct characters, Ramzi and Navid, the playwright, is illustrating the literal paralyzing nature of being divided.
Because they can't just talk it out.
Right. When you are truly torn between your logic and your intuition, you aren't one person struggling. You feel like 2 separate people who cannot find any common ground whatsoever.
Man, that is so accurate. Let's look at how those 2 halves behave, because it really paints a vivid picture of what anxiety actually feels like.
It really does.
So Ramzi represents pure reason. He's sharp, he's deeply skeptical, and fiercely proud. In the opening scenes, he's just sitting in the corner aggressively reading a physics textbook.
Just trying to logic his way out of the darkness.
Literally. The script notes that he constantly explains things because he is absolutely terrified of whatever cannot be explained.
And then, on the opposite side of that room, you have Navid.
Right.
And Navid is the complete embodiment of intuition. He is dreamlike and, frankly, unsettlingly calm. He spends his time just standing at the window.
But not even looking outside, right?
No, not even looking at the street. He's just staring at the glass itself.
Yeah.
He operates entirely on feeling. He even remembers things that haven't actually happened yet.
Which is so spooky. But the playwright does something fascinating here to show what anxiety actually feels like in the body. There is this strict rule built into the staging.
Oh, the touching rule.
Yeah. Ramzi and Navid are never allowed to physically touch. They can never reconcile. And whenever they are on the verge of agreeing on something, an object in the room literally breaks.
It's such a brilliant mechanic.
It is, because that is what true insomnia is. It's the absolute inability of your logic and your gut feeling to ever shake hands.
And what's fascinating here is that because they can't agree, Armin is locked in total paralysis.
Just stuck.
Right. He can't sleep, but he's also entirely disconnected from waking life.
Hmm.
And they are surrounded by an even deeper layer of the subconscious on stage.
The other characters.
Yeah, the stage also holds the blind man, who is this figure who never speaks and rarely moves. And then there's the chorus of the sleepless.
And the chorus is made up of just ordinary people, right? Like a woman in a house coat, a guy still wearing his
Yeah.
work uniform.
Exactly. Just everyday folks.
And they voice the heavy truths that neither Armin's rational mind nor his intuitive mind are equipped to handle. They essentially speak for the blind man's silence. And early in the first act, they drop this absolute bombshell of a line. They say, some people stop sleeping because they suspect they have already died and no one has told them.
I mean, chills. It completely reframes the entire concept of the play.
It really does.
Insomnia is no longer just a medical issue or a stress response to a bad day at work. It becomes a spiritual condition.
Right, like an existential threat.
Exactly. It's the mind sensing an unfinished meaning, a fundamental disruption in the natural order of things. And it just refuses to shut down until the threat is identified.
And that creeping sensation is what finally pushes Armin out into the night. Because his intuition, Navid, senses that something out in the dark is suffering from that exact same disruption.
He feels a kinship with it.
Yeah. So Armin climbs out his bedroom window and just wanders into a neighborhood park. And underneath the flickering streetlight, he spots an old man.
And the old man is doing this highly deliberate, almost ritualistic pacing in a circle.
Right. And Navid tells Armin that this old man comes to the park every night as a punishment.
A punishment for surviving something that shouldn't have been survived.
Which is such a heavy concept. And Armin just becomes captivated by this. He spends nights just following in the shadows, watching the old man pace, and eventually tracking him to a moonlit cemetery.
And the imagery in the cemetery is incredibly eerie. The gravestones are described as looking like people who've been holding their breath for a very long time.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And the old man kneels in front of an unmarked grave. But he doesn't pray. He just answers a question that only he can hear, simply whispering, "Not yet."
And Armin's logic and intuition are both completely baffled by this behavior. Ramzi and Navid don't know what to do with it. So finally, on the fifth night, Armin steps out of the shadows and allows himself to be seen.
And instead of demanding answers, which you might expect, he just asks the old man for a game of chess.
The old man accepts, but he makes this very sharp observation about human nature first. He says that most people stop following him after the second night.
Right?
Because curiosity begins as an appetite, but very quickly it turns into an obligation.
And obligations are easy to abandon when we get tired.
Exactly. But he notes that Armin is different. He says Armin carries his obligations until they become part of his physical body.
So they sit down at a cold stone table in the park to play. And from this point forward, the play uses the mechanics of chess as this sprawling, complex metaphor for how we experience time.
It's so clever. The chorus of The Sleepless breaks it down stage by stage for the audience.
Yeah, they outline the 3 phases of the game.
Right. So first is the opening, which represents youth. It's entirely theoretical, full of hope, and for a brief moment, both players have perfect equality on the board.
Everything is possible.
Everything is possible. Then you hit the middle game, which represents the bulk of human life.
And the middle game is where all that theory just falls apart. Your carefully constructed plans violently collide with the other person's plans.
Chaos ensues.
Absolute chaos. Something completely unplanned emerges from that wreckage.
And if you're listening right now, just think about your own middle game for a second. Think about those ironclad life plans you made in your early 20s.
Oh, man.
Right. How many of those have violently collided with the reality of other people's choices or economic shifts or just pure chance?
Most of them, probably.
Yeah, most of us are living in the middle game, just trying to manage the beautiful wreckage of our original plans.
That's a great way to put it.
And finally, the chorus describes the end game. That is the final stage, what remains when absolutely everything unessential has been captured and swept off the board.
But the way this specific game is played between them drives Armin's logical half, Ramzi, absolutely crazy.
Whoa, he loses his mind.
He really does.
Ew.
Armin's playing white,
Hmm.
which the old man points out is the color of people who still believe they are the ones who begin things.
Wow.
But when the old man, playing black, makes his answering moves, he uses an opening strategy that Ramzi has never seen in any textbook.
Right. Ramzi is hovering over the board, just furious. He says the opening is completely irrational because it violates the foundational principle of chess, which is center control.
He takes it so personally.
He really does. Ramzi treats this move as a literal attack on logic itself. But it raises a really compelling philosophical point. If the center of the board is ultimately an illusion, like the old man claims, why do we spend our entire youth, and honestly most of our adult lives, fighting so hard to hold on to it?
A great question. And the old man's response is incredibly gentle, but it is just devastating to Ramsey's entire worldview.
How so?
Well, he explains that the center is a necessary illusion. It gives you structure and purpose, sustaining you just long enough for you to learn that it was always an illusion.
Oh, that's good.
By the time you realize the center won't hold, you've already developed your pieces. You've grown up. You needed the lie of the center to mature.
So the illusion was the tool.
Exactly. Ancient things that have survived for millennia, often appear entirely irrational to a modern system-building mind simply because they predate our neat categories.
And as Nevin points out from the shadows, explanation kills the thing it touches, but understanding leaves it alive.
That's such a Navid thing to say.
Totally. So they play this game night after night, and on the seventh night, just as dawn is starting to bleed into the sky, the old man declares checkmate.
The board is completely devastated.
Yeah, it's a very late end game. And in that moment, Armin finally understands who he's playing.
And he asks the old man a highly specific question. He asks if he has read the Gospel of John, specifically the 11th chapter.
Okay, I have to stop you there, because the leap from a guy playing weird chess in a local park to a 2,000-year-old biblical figure is massive.
It is quite the jump.
Yeah. So how does Armin actually connect those dots? What is the mechanism of that realization?
It's all woven into the way the old man talks about the endgame. He abandons standard chess terminology entirely. As the board empties out, he starts describing a previous match he played a very long time ago.
Oh, okay.
He talks about his king being trapped in a completely dark square for 4 distinct moves.
Meaning 4 days.
Right, 4 days. He mentions the opponent rolling away the stone that was blocking the piece, and he describes the overwhelming smell of stale linen and burial spices when the piece was finally freed.
Oh.
And then he tells Armin about hearing the weeping of 2 women, 2 sisters, before he even saw the light of the board.
So the clues just cascade until the conclusion is absolutely undeniable. The old man is Lazarus.
The very same.
The man who was dead for 4 days, buried in a cave, and miraculously raised by Jesus. Armin realizes that the scripture meticulously documents the resurrection, but it completely leaves out what happened after the miracle.
And the old man just smiles at the boy's realization and says, Scripture is selective about its silences.
That's haunting.
He recalls the euphoria of the moment, the villagers weeping from joy, the bandages coming off. But then the euphoria fades and reality sets in. He says, and then I had to figure out what to do with Tuesday.
And every mundane Tuesday after that for 2,000 years?
Yeah.
The playwright pulls from some really fascinating historical and theological context here to show what surviving a miracle actually looks like.
It's incredibly thoroughly researched.
It is. The script's notes explain that after his resurrection, Lazarus became an immediate target. The chief priests actually plotted to kill him to destroy the walking evidence of the miracle.
Which is just wild to think about.
It's crazy, and after a brief mention in the 12th chapter of John, the biblical record goes totally dark on him.
But historical legend did not go dark. As the chess game concludes, the play layers 2 distinct historical traditions right on top of the stage. The staging literally splits into 3 simultaneous realities.
Right, and the script is clear that these aren't flashbacks.
No, they are the exact same burden of survival experienced across different centuries.
So the first tableau happens right there in Bethany, immediately after the resurrection. His sister Martha is frantically trying to explain his behavior to the terrified villagers.
Because he's not acting like they want him to act.
Exactly. Lazarus just wants to go back to being ordinary. He wants to eat breakfast and sweep the floor. But the villagers absolutely refuse to let him.
They want a spectacle.
They demand that he be constantly joyful, that he regaled them with secrets of the afterlife, and he simply tells them that returning was worse than leaving.
Which is devastating.
Yeah.
And then the second tableau explores the Eastern tradition, which is set in Cyprus.
Right.
He's standing in front of a local priest who is holding out these elaborate, incredibly heavy bishop's robes. The priest insists that God preserved him for a greater purpose, that the people of Kishan desperately need a living symbol that death isn't final.
And Lazarus responds so quietly. He says he understands that they need a symbol, but he is just a tired man who cannot sleep, who wakes up at 3 in the morning knowing something is fundamentally wrong in his chest.
But he takes the robes anyway.
Yeah. He puts them on because he has absolutely nothing else to do at this time. He wears them for 30 years, and they never once feel like they belong to him.
And then the final tableau shifts to the Western tradition. set in Provence, France. According to legend, Lazarus and his sisters were forced into a boat with no oars and no sails by the Romans and abandoned to the open sea.
A death sentence,
Ah,
basically.
exactly.
Okay.
Yet, they miraculously washed ashore in France. A monk narrates this scene on stage, suggesting that some men survive because heaven actively protects them. But others survive simply because even death has grown tired of the argument.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though, because if you've ever gone through a massive life change like surviving a severe illness, a massive trauma, or even stepping into sudden, overwhelming success, that dynamic is incredibly familiar.
Oh, absolutely.
We demand that survivors become permanent sources of inspiration. We want them to be endless walking symbols of hope and resilience for our own comfort.
Like a living TED Talk.
Yes, exactly like a living TED Talk. And in doing so, we completely strip them of their right to just be a tired, uncertain human being trying to navigate a Tuesday.
It is the ultimate burden of outliving your own category. Lazarus explains that society has neat categories for the living and neat categories for the dead.
But he doesn't fit either.
Right. He lived too long in the wrong one, and now neither side fully claims him. He says he is a glitch in the architecture of reality.
And that deep exhaustion the monk describes in France forces Armin to ask a really difficult question. As they sit by the empty chessboard, Armin asks, "What is the tragedy if it isn't death?"
And Lazarus replies with one word: continuation.
It's so bleak, but it forces us to look at the mechanics of grief from a highly uncomfortable angle.
It really does. Lazarus explains that when he died, he was mourned properly. The world built a scaffolding around his absence. His sisters were doing the grueling work of processing their grief.
And then he came back.
He didn't just return. He interrupted the mourning. The careful, necessary accommodation of his death had to be violently dismantled.
He tells Armin, "I was alive again," which meant the wound had to stay open. The true tragedy is that his return didn't erase the pain of his death. It permanently suspended it.
Because his sisters could never look at him again without remembering the smell of the tomb.
Which brings us to a staggering realization delivered by the chorus in the play's epilogue. Because we culturally assume that miracles are designed to create faith.
But the chorus corrects this assumption entirely. They say miracles do not create faith. Miracles create witnesses.
And the psychological task of being a witness is nearly unbearable. You have seen something that cannot be accurately translated into any common language, yet you are expected to testify to it for the rest of your life.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, for a true witness, belief is no longer a possibility.
Because they know.
Because they know. And knowing is a completely different country from believing, with entirely different borders, and there is absolutely no road back.
You can't unknow something.
Exactly. Once you know, you are permanently separated from the people who only have the luxury of belief.
So, what does this all mean? How does this abstract theological concept tie back to a teenager in a bedroom? Why is a 15-year-old boy's insomnia intertwined with a 2,000-year-old resurrected man?
Because Armin is suffering from the exact same affliction, just on a deeply internal psychological level.
Right.
In the final moments of the play, Ramzi and Navid, his logic and his intuition, finally stop fighting.
But not because they agree, right?
No, not because they've reached an agreement. They stop fighting because they realize Armin has known the truth the entire time and has just been carrying the weight of it alone. Armin looks at Lazarus and asks, "Which one are you? The one that died, the one that returned, or the one that is still sitting in the dark of the cave?"
And Lazarus says, "All of them."
All of them. Resurrection, or surviving any profound trauma, divides a person into all their possible selves simultaneously.
And then the chorus steps forward and delivers the ultimate thesis of the play. Human beings do not fear death most deeply. What we truly fear is fragmentation.
We are terrified of being divided against ourselves. We fear having one piece of our identity remain permanently trapped in the dark cave of our past, while another piece is forced to walk out into the morning light, put on a smile, and pretend everything is fine.
It's the agonizing knowledge that the person we were before a massive life event is someone we will never, ever be again.
To die before death, to be resurrected before resurrection. The chorus states it plainly. This is insomnia.
Insomnia is the creeping fear that some vital part of you has already been somewhere else, survived it, returned, and absolutely refuses to tell the rest of your mind what it found there.
And that is why Armin's logic and intuition cannot touch.
And that fragmentation also explains the mystery of the unmarked grave, doesn't it?
It does. When Armin finally asks Lazarus, whose grave he has been visiting night after night. Lazarus admits it is his own.
And Ramzi is still desperately trying to apply logic to the situation, yells out, "You can't have a grave. You are standing right here."
And Lazarus calmly replies, both things are true. I've had 2,000 years to grow comfortable with that contradiction.
Wow. He visits his own grave because it represents the only place, the only memory, where his identity was entirely singular.
Where there was no fragmentation.
Right.
When he was in that grave, he was simply dead. There was no debate. Now he contains entirely too many things. The dead man, the returned brother, the reluctant bishop, the exiled survivor.
Every single century adds a new layer, a new category he is forced to carry.
And Armin asks him the only question left. Then why keep living?
And Lazarus gives this incredibly tired but deeply empathetic response. He says, "You keep living because, after a miracle, the people who love you need you to."
They need the living version of you.
Exactly. The dead version they could eventually finish mourning, but the living version keeps the wound open. And wounds, he says, are how the living know they are still alive.
As the actual morning light finally breaks across the park, Lazarus turns and walks away into the fog. He tells Armin he will see him again every time he cannot sleep, every time the night feels larger than the room.
And the play ends with the blind man tapping his cane on the stage, and the chorus quietly explaining why Lazarus's grave had no name carved into it.
Because a name would have implied that whatever was buried there was finished.
It's an absolutely sweeping, devastating journey. I mean, we started with a teenager staring at his bedroom ceiling, completely paralyzed by his own conflicting thoughts, and we ended up unraveling a 2,000-year-old game of chess.
Just incredible.
We had to realize that the absolute hardest part of surviving the impossible is the world's demand that you keep living as a symbol rather than a beautifully fractured, deeply tired human being.
This raises an important question, and it's one that completely changes how you view your own history.
Yeah, think about the deep fundamental transformations in your own life. Those moments where you survive something you previously thought was utterly impossible. Are you still trying to force your present, change self into the neat, comfortable categories of your past?
It's worth considering.
It really is, because maybe the things keeping you awake staring at the ceiling at 3 a.m. aren't your anxieties about the future at all. Maybe they are the unacknowledged, fragmented pieces of your own past that are simply waiting for you to stop trying to explain them and finally become their witness. Until our next deep dive, try to get some sleep,